Take her instead. That was the moment I realized a person could become a price tag without anyone raising their voice. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They just sat there, heavy, final, like something already decided long before I walked into that room. I remember the smell first: cheap whiskey, something burnt on the stove, and the faint scent of rain clinging to the coats of the men standing by our door. My mother didn't look at me when she said it. She looked at him, like I was already gone, like I wasn't part of the conversation anymore. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because something inside me had already gone quiet hours ago, maybe days, maybe years. The man she was speaking to didn't answer right away. That's what made it worse. Silence stretched across the room, thick enough to feel. Everyone waited for him. Even the air felt like it was holding its breath. I followed her gaze slowly, like I didn't want to see what was there, but knew I had to. He stood near the doorway, tall enough that the dim light from the hallway framed him like a shadow that didn't belong in our world. His suit was dark, perfectly fitted, the kind of clean that didn't exist in places like ours. He didn't look angry. He didn't look pleased. He just looked certain, like whatever happened next had already been accounted for. When his eyes finally moved to me, I felt it. Not fear. Not exactly. More like being seen too clearly, like he could read every bad decision that led to this moment written across my face. He took a step forward. Just one. But the entire room shifted with it. One of the men behind him straightened. My mother's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. I didn't move. Couldn't. His shoes stopped a few feet in front of me, close enough that I could notice the details. The faint crease in his sleeve, the quiet confidence in the way he stood, like he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He didn't reach for me, didn't circle me like I expected. He just watched, studied, like I wasn't an object being traded, but a question he hadn't decided how to answer yet. My heartbeat was loud in my ears, but somehow I could still hear everything else. The ticking clock on the wall, the rain tapping softly against the window, my mother's uneven breathing behind me. She's all I have, my mother added suddenly, her voice breaking in a way that sounded almost rehearsed. Pleased it's the only way. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because I finally understood. This wasn't desperation. This was a decision. He tilted his head slightly, like considering something no one else in the room could see. Then his gaze returned to mine, steady, unreadable. And when he finally spoke, his voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The debt is cleared. Just like that. No negotiation. No argument. The words landed, and for a second, I thought it was over. That I could walk away. That maybe this night would end differently than it began. But then he added, almost as an afterthought, she comes with me. My breath caught, not because I didn't expect it, but because of how easily he said it. Like both things could be true at once. Like I could be free and still belong to him in a way I didn't understand yet. I finally found my voice, though it barely felt like mine. Why? It came out softer than I intended. Fragile. He looked at me for a long moment. And for the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not warmth. Not kindness. But something a less cold. Because, he said quietly, if I leave you here, someone else will come. The room went silent again. But this time, it felt different. Like the world had tilted, just slightly, and nothing would ever sit right again. I did not say goodbye. I do not think anyone expected me to. The moment he turned toward the door, the room seemed to follow his decision without question. One of the men stepped aside, already opening a path that had not existed a second ago. I hesitated for half a breath, my eyes flicking once toward my mother. She still would not look at me. Her hands were wrapped around a glass that she was not drinking from, her shoulders slightly hunched, like she had already convinced herself this was necessary. That was the part that hurt. Not what she did, but how easily she accepted it. I swallowed whatever words tried to rise in my throat and stepped forward. My shoes sounded too loud against the worn floorboards, each step pulling me further away from something that had never really been a home. The hallway outside felt colder, cleaner, like the world had already shifted the moment I crossed that threshold. He walked ahead of me, not once checking if I followed. He did not need to. The two men behind me made sure of that, not touching, just present enough that stopping did not feel like an option. Outside, the rain had slowed to a thin drizzle, the kind that clung to your skin without you noticing right away. A black car waited at the curb, its surface reflecting the streetlights in long, quiet streaks. The driver opened the rear door before we even reached it. I paused again, just for a second, staring at the open space like it meant something more than it did. He noticed. Of course he did. "You can still walk away," he said, his voice calm, almost indifferent. The words surprised me enough that I looked at him fully for the first time since we left the apartment. "Can I?" I asked. He held my gaze, not challenging, not softening, just honest in a way I was not prepared for. "No," he answered after a beat. "But I wanted you to understand the difference." A strange sound almost escaped my throat, something between a laugh and disbelief, but I swallowed it down and slid into the car. The leather seat was cold beneath me, unfamiliar, too clean. He entered after me, the door closing with a quiet finality that felt louder than anything that had happened tonight. The car moved before I could process it, pulling away from the curb with smooth precision. I watched the building disappear through the window, growing smaller with every second until it became just another shadow in the rain. I thought I would feel something. Relief, fear, anger. But all I felt was suspended, like I had been removed from one life without being placed into another yet. Minutes passed in silence. The city lights blurred into long streaks of gold and white as we drove, the rhythm of the road steady beneath us. He did not look at me. Not once. His attention stayed forward, his posture relaxed but controlled, like this was just another part of his day. I studied him instead, quietly, trying to understand the man who had just changed everything with a few simple words. "You said the debt was cleared," I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It is. Then why am I here?" The question hung between us, heavier than the silence before. He exhaled slowly, like he had expected it, like he had already considered how to answer. "Because debts are not the only things people owe," he said. I frowned slightly, not understanding. "I do not owe you anything," I replied, the words coming out sharper than I intended. For the first time since we left, his head turned. His eyes met mine, dark and focused, but not angry. "You are right," he said quietly. "You do not." He let that sit for a moment, letting me feel the weight of it before continuing. "But that does not mean I leave things unfinished." I did not know what that meant. Not yet. But something in the way he said it made my chest tighten, not with fear this time, but with something far more dangerous. Uncertainty. Because whatever I thought this was going to be, it was already becoming something else. The car slowed before I realized we had left the part of the city I knew behind. The streets grew quieter, wider, the buildings taller and colder, like they belonged to people who never worried about rent or broken doors or overdue notices sitting unopened on kitchen counters. I pressed my fingers lightly against the window, watching the reflection of myself instead of the passing lights. I looked the same. Same face. Same tired eyes. But something had shifted underneath, something I could not name yet. The car turned once more, then slowed to a near stop before a set of tall iron gates. They opened without hesitation, as if the car itself had been recognized. No guard stepped forward. No questions asked. Just silent permission. I felt that more than anything else. The kind of power that did not need to explain itself. We drove through slowly, the tires crunching softly against a long gravel path that stretched ahead like a quiet warning. The house came into view gradually, not all at once, like it was revealing itself on purpose. Large, clean lines, soft lights glowing from inside. It did not look like the places I had imagined in my head. No darkness, no chaos, just controlled stillness. The car stopped at the front entrance, and for a second, neither of us moved. I did not know what I was waiting for. Maybe for him to say something. Maybe for myself to wake up. He stepped out first, the movement smooth, practiced. The driver opened my door before I could reach for the handle, and I hesitated again, staring at the ground like it might give me answers. It did not. So I stepped out. The air felt different here. Cleaner. Quieter. Like the world outside had been muted on purpose. I wrapped my arms around myself without thinking, not from the cold, but from the unfamiliar silence. He was already walking toward the front door. I followed. The door opened before we reached it. A woman stood inside, older, composed, dressed in a way that made everything around her seem more organized just by her presence. She nodded once to him, then looked at me, not with curiosity, not with judgment, just awareness. "The room is ready," she said softly. He gave a slight nod in return and stepped inside. I paused at the threshold, my feet refusing to move for half a second longer. This was the moment I realized. The point where I either stepped into whatever this was, or stayed exactly who I had been. The problem was, I no longer knew what I was stepping away from. So I walked in. The warmth hit me first, then the quiet. No shouting. No noise from neighbors through thin walls. No television playing too loud in the background. Just space. Clean, open space that felt almost unreal. I stood there longer than I should have, taking it in, trying to understand how a place could feel so safe and so unsettling at the same time. "You will stay here," he said behind me. His voice cut through the stillness, not harsh, just certain. I turned slowly. "For how long?" I asked. He did not answer right away. Instead, his gaze moved across the room, like he was checking something only he understood. Then it returned to me. "Until I am sure," he said. "Sure of what?" I pressed. Something flickered in his expression again. Subtle, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "That no one else will try to claim what was already offered," he replied. The words settled in my chest, heavier than they should have been. Not because of what he said, but because of what it meant. I was not here because he wanted me. I was here because someone else might. And for the first time since this started, that thought made something cold crawl up my spine. I swallowed slowly, forcing my voice to stay steady. "And if I want to leave?" His eyes held mine, calm, unshaken. "Then you will tell me," he said. A pause, just long enough to matter. "And I will decide." That was it. No anger, no threat, just truth, simple and immovable. I stood there, surrounded by walls that did not feel like a cage, but did not feel like freedom either. And somewhere between those two things, I realized something that made my chest tighten in a way I could not ignore. I had not been brought here to be owned. I had been brought here to be kept. The room they gave me was bigger than the entire apartment I had left behind, and that realization alone made it hard to breathe. I stood just inside the doorway, not stepping fully in, like crossing that invisible line would mean accepting something I was not ready to name. The woman who had opened the door earlier moved past me quietly, setting a folded set of clothes on the edge of the bed with precise, practiced movements. "If you need anything, you may ask," she said, her tone gentle but distant, like kindness measured carefully. I nodded without speaking. My voice felt misplaced here, like it belonged somewhere else entirely. She left without another word, the door closing softly behind her, and the silence returned immediately, heavier this time. I waited. I do not know what for. Maybe for someone to come back. Maybe for him to change his mind. But nothing happened. The house remained still, like it had decided I was no longer worth reacting to. Slowly, I stepped further into the room. The carpet felt soft beneath my feet, too clean, too even. No stains, no worn patches, just perfection. I walked toward the window, drawn to the only familiar thing left, the outside world. The glass was cool under my fingertips as I looked out over the long driveway we had come through. The gates were barely visible from here, just a dark line in the distance. Too far to run to. Not that I would have known where to go even if I tried. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding and turned back to the room. Everything had its place. The bed was untouched, the sheets smooth and white, the kind that looked like they had never been slept in. A dresser stood against the wall, already stocked, I noticed when I pulled one drawer open carefully. Clothes. New. Folded. Chosen. Not by me. That detail settled somewhere deep, uncomfortable, but not surprising. Nothing here had been left to chance. Not even me. I closed the drawer slowly and sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress barely dipping under my weight. For a moment, I just sat there, my hands resting in my lap, staring at nothing. Then everything I had not felt earlier began to press in all at once. Not loud, not overwhelming, just steady, like a quiet realization that refused to leave. I was here, and I was not going back. A soft knock pulled me out of my thoughts. I looked up, surprised by how sharp the sound felt in the stillness. "Yes," I called, my voice quieter than I intended. The door opened, and he stepped inside without hesitation, closing it behind him with the same calm control he carried in every movement. I stood immediately, instinct more than choice. He noticed. Of course he did. His eyes moved briefly around the room, taking in details that I had only begun to notice myself, then returned to me. "You will have privacy here," he said, as if continuing a conversation we had not started. I frowned slightly. Privacy. I repeated. The word felt strange in my mouth. He nodded once. No one enters without permission. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been sitting at the edge of my mind since the moment I arrived. Including you? For the first time, something almost like amusement flickered in his eyes, subtle but real. If you ask it, he said. That answer did not make things clearer. It made them more complicated. I crossed my arms lightly, not defensive, just grounding myself. You keep saying things like that, I said, like I have a choice. His gaze held mine, steady, unshaken. You do, he replied. Just not all of them. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard more than anything else he had said tonight. I searched his expression, trying to find something hidden behind it, some sign that this was another kind of control. But there was nothing, just certainty. Why? I asked again, softer this time. Why me? He was quiet for a moment, longer than before, like this question required something different, something real. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more measured. Because you did not beg, he said. I blinked, confused. What? Most people do, he continued. They negotiate. They plead. They try to make themselves smaller, easier to trade. His eyes did not leave mine. You did not. I did not know what to say to that. Because the truth was, I had not done any of those things. Not because I was brave, but because I had nothing left to offer. He seemed to understand that without me saying it. He stepped back toward the door, his hand resting lightly on the handle. Get some rest, he said quietly. Tomorrow will make more sense. I almost believed him. That was the dangerous part. Because as the door closed behind him, leaving me alone again in a place that did not feel like a cage, but did not feel like freedom either, one thought settled in my mind with unsettling clarity. I was not here because I was valuable. I was here because I had nothing left to lose. And somehow, that made me the one thing he could not ignore. I did not sleep. I lay there for hours, staring at a ceiling that felt too high, too distant, like even it belonged to a different world. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same moment again. My mother's voice. His silence. The way everything ended without anyone asking me if it should. At some point, the darkness outside the window softened into gray, then into the pale light of morning. I sat up slowly, the sheets barely wrinkled beneath me, untouched by rest. For a second, I forgot where I was. Then the quiet reminded me. This place did not wake up the way my old life did. No alarms. No shouting. No footsteps in the hallway. Just stillness, waiting. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood, the floor cool beneath my feet. The clothes from last night were still on me, a reminder that none of this had been imagined. I crossed the room and opened the door carefully, half expecting someone to be standing on the other side. No one was. The hallway stretched out in both directions, wide and silent, lined with doors that all looked exactly the same. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure if I was allowed to leave the room at all. Then I remembered what he had said. You have choices, just not all of them. I stepped out. My footsteps echoed softly against the polished floor as I moved forward, each step measured, cautious. The house revealed itself slowly, room by room, corner by corner. Everything was clean, ordered, intentional. A living room with large windows letting in the morning light. A kitchen that looked untouched, like it existed more for appearance than use. I paused near the center of it all, turning in a slow circle, trying to understand the scale of it. This was not just a house. It was a statement, and I was somewhere inside it. You are awake. His voice came from behind me, calm and steady, as if he had been there long before I noticed. I turned quickly, my heartbeat picking up in a way I could not control. He stood near the entrance to the room, already dressed, already composed, like sleep was something optional for him. I could not sleep, I admitted, the truth easier than pretending. He studied me for a moment, his gaze moving over details I had not considered. Not intrusive, just observant. That will change, he said simply. I almost asked how he could be so sure, but something in his tone made the question feel unnecessary. Instead, I crossed my arms lightly, grounding myself again. What happens now? I asked. He stepped closer, not enough to crowd me, just enough to make his presence undeniable. You learn, he replied. Learn what? His expression did not shift, but something in his eyes sharpened slightly. How to exist in a place where no one can trade you, he said. The words landed deeper than I expected. I frowned, not fully understanding. And what does that mean? He did not answer right away. Instead, he moved past me, reaching for a glass on the counter, pouring water with a quiet precision that matched everything else about him. It means, he said slowly, setting the glass down without drinking it, that you stop thinking of yourself as something that can be taken. I let out a small breath, almost a scoff, before I could stop myself. That is easy for you to say. He turned then, his gaze meeting mine again, steady and unflinching. No, he said quietly. It is not. There was something different in his voice this time. Not softer, not harsher, just real in a way that made me pause. I searched his face, looking for the reason behind it, but whatever it was, he did not offer it freely. You will stay here for now, he continued, the moment passing as quickly as it came. You will have access to the house. There are no locked doors. I blinked, surprised. None. He shook his head once. If I wanted you contained, you would not be asking that question. That answer sent a strange feeling through me. Not relief, not fear, something in between. I nodded slowly, trying to process it. And you? I asked before I could stop myself. Where will you be? A faint hint of something crossed his expression, almost like amusement, but gone before I could be sure. Around, he said. That was it. No explanation. No details. Just a presence that did not need to be seen to be felt. He turned to leave, but paused at the edge of the room, glancing back at me one last time. Do not confuse quiet with safety, he said. And do not confuse control with ownership. Then he walked away, leaving me standing in the middle of a house that felt more open than any place I had ever been, and yet somehow more controlled than anything I had ever known. And for the first time since I arrived, I realized something that made my chest tighten in a way I could not ignore. He was not teaching me how to survive him. He was teaching me how to survive everything else that might come after him. The rest of the day passed in a way that felt unfamiliar, like time had slowed down just enough for me to notice things I had never had the space to notice before. No one followed me. No one watched me openly. And somehow, that made me more aware, not less. I moved through the house carefully, testing what he had said. Every door I approached opened without resistance. Bedrooms that looked untouched. An office lined with shelves, everything in its place, nothing out of order. A dining room that felt too large for a single person to ever use. It was not just that there were no locks. It was that everything here felt intentional, like control did not come from barriers, but from design. By the time the afternoon light began to fade, I found myself back near the front windows, watching the long driveway again. I did not remember deciding to come here. My feet had just brought me. The gates stood in the distance, unchanged, silent. I stared at them for a long time, longer than I should have, letting the idea form slowly instead of pushing it away. He said I could leave. No locked doors. No guard stopping me. Just distance. Just uncertainty. That was all. I took a breath. Then another, my fingers tightening slightly at my sides. Then I turned and walked. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just steady. Like I was proving something, though I was not sure to who. The front door opened as easily as every other one had. The air outside felt different than it had last night. Brighter. Less heavy. But it still carried that same quiet, controlled stillness. I stepped forward, onto the gravel path, the small crunch beneath my shoes louder than anything else around me. Each step felt deliberate, counted. I did not look back. Not at the house. Not at the windows. I kept my eyes forward, on the gates that seemed both close and impossibly far at the same time. The walk stretched longer than I expected. A minute. 2. Maybe more. The distance played tricks on me, making it feel like I was moving without getting closer. My breathing shifted, not from effort, but from the weight of what I was doing. Because this was a choice. One of the few I had. And I was taking it. I was halfway there when I heard it. Not footsteps. Not a voice. Just the quiet sound of gravel shifting behind me. I stopped. Slowly. Not out of fear, but because something in me already knew. I turned. He stood there, several feet away, hands at his sides, his posture as calm as it had been the moment I met him. He had not rushed. Had not called out. He had just followed. I held his gaze, refusing to look away first, even though my chest tightened slightly under the weight of it. You said I could leave. I said, my voice steady despite everything inside me shifting. He nodded once. You can. I waited for more. An explanation. A condition. But none came. The silence stretched again, familiar now, almost expected. I glanced back toward the gates, then returned my focus to him. Then why are you here? I asked. This time, there was no pause. To see if you would, he replied. The answer landed in a way I was not prepared for. Not controlling, not threatening, just observant. Like this had always been part of something larger I did not understand yet. I swallowed, my fingers curling slightly at my sides. And if I keep walking? I pressed. His expression did not change. Then you leave, he said simply. I searched his face, looking for doubt, for something hidden behind the words. But there was nothing. Just certainty. Just truth. I looked back at the gates again, really looked this time. At the distance. At what waited beyond them. Nothing. No plan. No direction. Just the same world I had come from. Unchanged. Waiting. Then I looked at him. Standing there. Not blocking me. Not stopping me. Just present. And for the first time since I started walking, I hesitated. Not because I was afraid to leave, but because I was not sure I wanted to return to a place where I had never been chosen at all. The realization hit quietly. No drama. No sudden shift. Just clarity settling into place. I took a slow breath, then turned back around. Not toward the gates, but toward the house. Toward him. I walked past him without a word, feeling his presence beside me for a brief moment before it fell and stepped behind me again. And this time, the choice felt different. Not like something taken, not like something forced, but like something I had stepped into on my own. And that made it harder to ignore the truth that followed. I had not stayed because I could not leave. I had stayed because for the first time, leaving felt like going backward. I expected something to change after that moment on the driveway. Some shift in how he looked at me, how the house felt, how I fit into all of it. But nothing did. And somehow, that made everything different. The sun had already begun to dip by the time we walked back inside, the light stretching long across the floor, turning everything softer, quieter. He did not say anything as we entered. Neither did I. But the silence between us no longer felt empty. It felt aware, like it had seen what just happened and decided to remember it. I moved further into the house, slower this time, not exploring, not testing, just existing. He remained near the entrance for a moment longer before stepping inside fully, the door closing behind him with the same quiet finality as before. I stopped near the center of the room and turned to face him. You knew I would come back? I said. It was not a question. He shook his head once. No, he replied. I knew you would decide. That answer settled differently than I expected. I studied him, trying to understand the space between those two things. What if I did not? I asked. He walked past me, not close enough to touch, but close enough that I could feel the shift in the air as he moved. Then this would have ended, he said simply. I turned, watching him as he reached the same counter from earlier, the glass still sitting exactly where he had left it. Untouched. Like everything else here, waiting for intention. Just like that. I pressed. He picked up the glass, finally taking a sip before setting it back down. Not everything needs to continue, he said. I frowned slightly, the words pulling at something I could not fully explain. But you came after me, I pointed out. You followed me. His gaze met mine again, steady, unbothered. I observe, he corrected. There is a difference. I let out a quiet breath, shaking my head slightly. You make everything sound simple. A faint hint of something crossed his expression again, not quite amusement, not quite disagreement. It is simple, he said. People just complicate it. That answer should have frustrated me. Instead, it made me pause. Because for the first time, I realized he was not speaking from distance. He was speaking from experience. I crossed my arms lightly, leaning back against the edge of the table behind me, grounding myself in something solid. So what now? I asked again, softer this time. I stay. I walk around this place. And then what? He was quiet for a moment, longer than before, like this question mattered more than the others. You start to see, he said finally. See what? His eyes held mine, unwavering. The difference between being placed somewhere and choosing to remain. The words landed slowly, like they needed time to settle into meaning. I looked away first this time, my gaze drifting toward the windows, the fading light outside casting long shadows across the floor. And what if I still feel like I was placed here? I asked quietly. His voice came without hesitation. Then you have not decided yet. That answer stayed with me longer than anything else he had said, because it meant something I was not ready to admit out loud. That maybe this was not about where I was. Maybe it was about whether I allowed it to define me. I pushed myself away from the table, moving toward the window again, drawn back to that same view. The gates were still there, unchanged, but they did not feel the same anymore. I rested my hand lightly against the glass, my reflection staring back at me, familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. "You keep saying I have a choice," I said, not turning around. "But it does not feel like one." I heard his footsteps behind me, slower this time, more deliberate. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to be present, far enough to leave space. "That is because you are used to choices that come with consequences you cannot control," he said. I turned then, facing him again. "And this is different?" I asked. His expression did not change. "This is a choice where you control what it means," he replied. Silence followed, but it was not heavy anymore. It was steady, like something waiting to be understood. I held his gaze for a moment longer before looking away again, my thoughts shifting, rearranging, trying to catch up with something that had already moved ahead of me. And somewhere in that quiet space between what I had been and what I was becoming, one realization settled in with unsettling clarity. I was not trying to escape him anymore. I was trying to understand why staying felt like the first real decision I had ever made. The night settled differently this time. It did not feel like something closing in. It felt like something unfolding. I stood by the window long after the last of the light disappeared, watching the reflection of the room replace the world outside. The glass no longer showed distance. It showed me, still here, still choosing. I did not hear him leave. That was the thing about him. He did not announce his presence, and he did not announce his absence. He simply existed within the space, shaping it without ever forcing it. At some point, I moved without thinking, my feet carrying me through the house again, but this time without hesitation. Not searching, not testing, just moving like I belonged to the space, even if I had not decided what that meant yet. I passed the office again, the door slightly open, the dim light inside spilling into the hallway like an invitation that was not spoken out loud. I stopped, not because I was told to, but because I wanted to. That difference mattered now. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was exactly as I remembered. Ordered. Precise. A desk that looked untouched, except for a single folder placed neatly in the center. No clutter. No distraction. Just intention. I stepped inside, my eyes drawn immediately to that folder, like it had been left there for a reason. For me. I hesitated for a second, my fingers hovering just above it. Then I picked it up. It was lighter than I expected. Thinner. Whatever was inside, it was not much. But it felt like more. I opened it carefully. The first page stopped me. My name. Emily Carter. Typed cleanly at the top. Not handwritten. Not rushed. Intentional. My breath caught slightly as I turned the page. Information. Details. Things I had never told anyone. My school records. Medical history. Addresses I had lived at. Even the temporary ones I barely remembered myself. It was all there. Not messy. Not invasive. Just complete. Like someone had taken the time to understand every version of me that existed before this moment. I should have felt exposed, violated, angry, but I did not, because something about the way it was presented did not feel like control. It felt like preparation, like he had not taken me without knowing exactly what he was taking responsibility for. I lowered the folder slowly, my fingers tightening slightly around the edges. "You were not meant to find that yet." His voice came from behind me, quiet but unmistakable. I did not jump this time. I turned slowly, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "You said no locked doors," I replied. He stepped further into the room, his expression unchanged, his presence steady. "I did," he said. There was no correction, no disapproval, just acknowledgement. I held up the folder slightly. "You know everything about me," I said. It was not a question. He did not deny it. "Enough," he answered. I studied him, searching for something behind the word. "Why?" I asked again. This time, the question felt different. Less defensive, more direct. He paused for a moment, not avoiding the answer, just choosing it carefully. "Because I do not take responsibility for something I do not understand," he said. The words settled deeper than anything else he had said so far. Responsibility. Not ownership. Not control. Responsibility. I looked down at the folder again, then back at him. "I am not something," I said quietly. His gaze did not waver. "I know," he replied. And somehow, that made it worse. Because he meant it. I closed the folder slowly, setting it back on the desk exactly where I had found it. "Then why does it feel like I am?" I asked, my voice softer now, not accusing, just honest. He took a step closer, not enough to crowd me, but enough that the space between us felt intentional. Because you were treated like that before, he said, and you have not decided that you are not anymore. The truth in his voice hit harder than anything else could have. I held his gaze, my chest, tightening slightly, not from fear, but from recognition. Because he was right. And I hated that he was right. Silence stretched between us again, but it was different now. Not empty, not uncertain, just clear. I stepped back slightly, creating space that I suddenly needed. Not from him, but from the realization settling in. So what is this? I asked, gesturing lightly to the room, the house, everything around us. What am I doing here? He did not answer right away. His eyes held mine, steady, unwavering, like he had been waiting for this exact question. You are here, he said slowly, to decide what you are worth when no one is trying to buy you. The words landed, quiet but undeniable. And for the first time since this began, I felt something shift completely inside me. Not fear, not confusion, something else, something heavier. Because this was not about him anymore. This was about me. And that realization felt more dangerous than anything I had faced so far. Because it meant there was no one left to blame for what came next. I did not leave the office right away. After he spoke, after the words settled into something heavier than I expected, I just stood there, staring at the folder like it might explain everything if I looked at it long enough. But it did not. Because the answer was not in those pages. It was somewhere else. Somewhere I had avoided for a long time. I let out a slow breath and stepped away from the desk, creating distance not just from the folder, but from the version of myself it represented. The girl who had been tracked, recorded, reduced to information. I was still her, but I did not have to stay her. When I turned, he was still there, watching me, not impatient, not pressing, just waiting. Like whatever came next was not his to decide. That realization stayed with me as I walked past him, out of the office, back into the quiet hallway. My footsteps were steady now, not cautious, not uncertain, just steady. I did not stop until I reached the front of the house again. The same place where everything had felt too large, too unfamiliar, too controlled. The windows stretched out in front of me, reflecting the night, reflecting me. I looked at my reflection for a long moment. The same face, the same eyes, but something behind them had shifted. Not because of him, not because of this place, because of a choice I had not fully made until now. I heard him step into the room behind me, his presence settling into the space without disrupting it. You found your answer, he said quietly. It was not a question. I nodded once, my eyes still on the reflection. I think I did, I replied. My voice sounded different. Not stronger, not louder, just certain in a way it had not been before. I turned to face him fully this time, not out of obligation, not out of reaction, but because I wanted to. You said I am here to decide what I am worth, I continued. He did not interrupt, did not correct me, just listened. I thought that meant deciding if I stay or leave, I added. But it is not that. His gaze sharpened slightly, not with intensity, but with focus. No, he said. It is not. I took a small step forward, closing the distance just enough to feel the shift in the air between us. It is deciding that I was never something to be traded in the first place, I said. The words felt heavier out loud, real in a way they had not been inside my head. He held my gaze, steady, unwavering, like he had been waiting for me to reach that point on my own. Yes, he replied simply. No praise, no approval, just confirmation. And somehow, that meant more than anything else could have. I let out a slow breath, the tension I had carried since that night finally shifting into something else. Not gone, but different. So here is my decision, I said, my voice calm, grounded in something deeper than fear or confusion. I am staying. I watched his expression carefully, expecting something to change. But it did not. Not in the way I thought it would. There was no claim in his eyes. No sense of possession. Just that same quiet understanding. Then you stay, he said. No conditions. No hidden meaning. Just acceptance. I nodded once, letting that settle between us. Then I added, softer but just as certain. Not because I cannot leave. His gaze did not waver. I know, he replied. I held his eyes for one more moment before turning back to the window, to the reflection that no longer felt like something distant. The house was still the same. The gates were still out there. The world beyond them had not changed. But I had. And that changed everything. Because I was not here as a payment. I was not here as something owed. I was here because I chose to stand where no one could assign my value but me. And for the first time in my life, that choice did not feel like survival. It felt like power.